one of our subsequent webinars, we're going to talk about retainers and value-based pricing and things of that nature, which is really what you're doing, which is quite good, and it's really for high-level strategic consulting, which is, I'm sure, what it is that you're doing. But a question I have is, do you ever reflect back and see that, okay, for the previous whatever 2 or 3 months, track the hours you actually put in and see if you are realizing, it's a concept of realization, are you realizing the rate per hour that you would have thought about charging if you were? Have you done that analysis, and are you coming out ahead or below it?
Yes, great question, and yes, I have. I'm very conscious of that, and I am coming out ahead. And I had a deal with both companies that should the work be more than what we agreed on, and then we would renegotiate the next few hours of rate, et cetera, that they would, if I was giving them 5 days a month and it turned out a big project, I actually worked 6 or 7, then we would talk about that. But it hasn't come to that point, and I'm coming out ahead.
Well, great. So go ahead, Gary. I want you to continue, and then
Okay.
We got some questions queuing up. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, great. I'll finish up quickly. The only other point I would make is that the follow-on contracts now that I'm beginning to get fall in a couple of different categories. One is, okay, it's the size of the business, and it's as Steve talked about. Hey, if I'm going to work with a very large defense contractor and they're going after a huge multi-year, almost billion-dollar contract, well, I'm going to charge them my prime rate because, it's worth it to them should they win that, and it's that kind of work they need. But I have some smaller companies that just they need some senior advice and help, but they're not going to pay that, and the contracts they're going after that I'm helping with, or they've already got a contract and they just need me to come help a little bit, they can't afford it, and so I'm not going to turn my nose up at a lower rate because it's either that or sit and surf the internet all day long. So I'd rather be working and getting that experience, and so I consider the size of the company and the kind of work they're doing, and if it's comparable for a large company, large contract, I charge the higher rate, but I'm willing to take a lesser rate depending on the company and the kind of work they're doing. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Yeah, that's great insight. I'm sure a lot of people are taking good notes. So one of the questions we have, and Steve, maybe you'd want to answer this one, is what kinds of business development expenses where are you talking about when you talk about overhead and marketing and business? Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, one of the first things when marketing your services is that you want some sort of destination that you can provide to clients that explains what you do and how much it costs. And it's a leave behind, whether that's a landing page, it's a full operating website, it's a collateral piece, it's maybe a newsletter that you put together. Whatever the case is, there are costs associated with developing that and getting it out there so that it can be visible to your clients or potential clients. So that's one thing. And then there's costs associated with signing up with organizations and groups that are in your trade, whether it's geographically located or there's a programmer kind of summit that is every year in Las Vegas, and you need to fly there and you need to be there to meet contacts and shake hands and maybe meet face-to-face with some of the clients that you might work with. Those travel costs, the hotel costs, getting there, the time spent, those are all kind of investments in business development that are going to be part of your overhead costs.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, Gene. Gene,
yes.
This is Gary. Can I quickly say,
please.
Somebody out there, I agree with that. I've got brochures and cards. That's not very expensive. But I also did an inexpensive website. If anybody's interested in seeing some that someone like me did, it's www.ritchieleadership.com. Can get some ideas on the kind of thing you can do relatively inexpensively.
That's great. And can you share roughly the cost of that, Gary?
Well, it's $20 a month or something. I mean,
Okay.
you can get them ranging and get much more help if you're competent on doing some of that on your own. It's it's not very much.
And give everybody that website one more time.
www.ritchieleadership.com.
Great. Okay, I'm going to take a couple more questions. We've got some that are coming in through the chat and some that are raising hands that I think want to be unmuted. I'm going to try to unmute somebody. David, you have a hand up. We're going to unmute you and hear your question live. And then there's others that are basically looking to questions that they're being chatted online. So let's unmute David.
Muted.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead, David. Maybe David's. Oh, okay. Put his hand down. It was a mistake. Okay, sorry. Next is we've got a question that came in from Bruce that says, any tips on handling full disclosure between bill rate and pay rate? I kind of know what you mean. I think I know what you mean here. Some corporations, clients, who are certainly managed by either a managed service provider or a staffing company or sometimes even their procurement department, sometimes they require the pay rate of the actual person doing the work where the staffing company or the consulting company is charging a different rate, which is quite invasive, actually. And I think it's prominent maybe in the financial services industry. But it does happen, and any tips about doing it? Well, I think you just need to do it. If you want to continue working with the client, basically you're revealing your pay rate, and they're seeing what the bill rate is, so they want to put pressure on the company to disintermediate their markup. If you're truly an independent consultant, you don't really have a pay rate, right? So, there is no way. You gotta just tell them that you've got a cost structure in place, and you could just provide some type of a memorandum that says that the bill rate is a function of your costs and your utilization and all the things Steve just spoke to you about, because independent consultants that are truly out there in their own business. Like Gary, there is no pay rate. It's just a bill rate, and what you earn is what you keep. So a lot of times, unfortunately, clients don't understand that. They're really, certainly the procurement departments, they're looking to figure out. They don't want to be charged, double what somebody's being paid, and they're right in doing that. But those are just some of the realities to working in the commercial world primarily. I don't think that happens in the government world. So I hope that answers your question. There's another question now from Neil, and Steve, maybe you want to take this one. Is it true that sometimes a bill rate and a per diem are billed separately? Please discuss travel and living expenses in terms of billing. Example, separate per diem billings.
Yep.
So I think the question here, Steve, from Neil is, how do you deal with the per diem versus the actual hours, and maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the rules around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that I see come across, one is the scenario where a client wants to do some sort of all-inclusive rate. That means you incur all the expenses that you need to incur, and we're going to give you X amount of dollars. You don't submit us receipts. You just claim those as non-billable expenses at the end of the year, get your tax deduction. This is where it's really important to go through the cost analysis and add all of your fixed and variable costs up, and then add that kind of markup for what may come along. Because you don't want to be in a scenario where, yeah, you just got a $200,000 contract, but your expenses are $250,000, and you're in the hole. So that's kind of the all-inclusive scenario. The next is where you bill your expenses separately from your labor, and the client writes into your statement of work, yes, go ahead and bill us for any hotel, airfare, and send us actual receipts for the expenses that you incur, meals, or maybe you need to purchase some equipment or software, whatever the case is. And that's just as simple as putting your hours on an invoice, adding in all the expenses that you have receipts for, putting the receipts on there and delivering that to your client. The next has to do with per diems. And per diems are that, they're the set rates by the GSA that talk about how much you should be able to bill for either lodging or meals or both in a certain geographic area. And they have it all broken down by, I think it's zip code. And so in those cases, you can bill the client, instead of the actual receipt, the amount of the per diem in the location that you're staying. And when you do that, you don't need to keep track of all the receipts. You might actually spend $20 on a meal, but the per diem meal is $60 per day. Well, that means you bill 60, but you only incur 20. So, hey, you made a little bit extra cash that day. But the key component with per diems is that it's only good for a year. So once you start working in that location, the per diem clock starts running, and after a year, they assume that you should have figured out some sort of alternative situation where you don't need to claim per diems anymore. And there are certain rules about per diems versus actual expenses. But as a consultant, it's really up to you to design how you want to charge your services to the client. There may be rules at the client that they do certain things a certain way. Doesn't mean that's the way that it needs to be done, with maybe the exception of doing business with the government.
So let me just add to that. Thanks, Steve. So for Neil, your question is it true that sometimes a bill rate and a per diem are billed separately? The answer is yes, but they don't have to be. It's really how the client perhaps would want to see it. I think what Steve was referring to really gives you the ability that even if you are qualified for per diem, which means you have to be traveling a certain distance from where you live, and if you go beyond the certain metro area, I think it's about 50 miles, you're entitled to per diem, whether it's billed separately or not. And that's a big tax advantage, because basically per diem is an allowance for you to be working a distance from where your home is. So really good question. You got to look at the rules. There's government sites on that, and by all means, we'd if we could help you more, just reach out.